Friends and colleagues, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us here this evening at the Melbourne Law School as part of the White Noise of Settler Law series, jointly hosted by the Melbourne Law School's Indigenous Law and Justice Hub and our Criminal Law Research Forum. Can I begin by paying my respects to Wurundjeri elders past and present on whose country we are this evening, and I would in particular like to acknowledge Commissioner Sue-Ann Hunter, who is in attendance this evening, and in a moment I will introduce her and invite her to welcome us to her country. I would like to extend my respects to all First Nations people who are joining us this evening, whether in person or online. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I'd like to acknowledge that wherever you are, online or here in this room, we are meeting on land that always was and always will be Aboriginal land. One more acknowledgement from me, and that is of the Indigenous colleagues here at the Melbourne Law School who are playing a leading role in transforming the way that we undertake legal education and research here, and who of course are deeply embedded in public debates and processes around this country. I want to especially call out the work of our Associate Dean Indigenous, Dr. Eddie Kubillo, who's sitting here next to me, who has played an extraordinary ongoing role of leadership here in our law school, for which we are deeply grateful, Eddie. So thank you very much. Very briefly, some housekeeping. For friends and colleagues of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage, be advised that this evening's presentation does contain the names and images of deceased Indigenous people. For all of us, the presentation contains themes including Indigenous deaths in custody, genocide, ecocide and colonial violence. We encourage you to take care throughout this important conversation. And please access the resources that we've provided to debrief with a professional if that would be of assistance to you. COVID-safe compliance, we've moved to this very large room. If you feel uncomfortable in close proximity to others, feel free to relocate within the room, and sanitisers and masks are available, and I see many other masks right now. My last task this evening is to introduce Sue-Ann Hunter to welcome us to Wurundjeri country and the conversation this evening. Sue-Ann Hunter is a proud Wurundjeri and Wurrung woman committed to self-determination and to advocacy for the rights of all First Nations peoples. She has worked in the Aboriginal child and family welfare field for over 20 years, and she is currently a Commissioner at the Yorta Justice Commission. Please join with me in making Sue-Ann feel welcome as she welcomes us.
Wurundjeri Bikal Wurundjeri Balaku Nadanik Sue-Ann. My name is Sue-Ann Hunter, and I'm a proud Wurundjeri Nurray or Wurrung woman. I'll kill Eddie later for doing a bio. I want to acknowledge my elders and my ancestors. Without them, I wouldn't be able to stand up here today. And without them, April wouldn't be able to stand up here and speak her truths as well. I come from a very long line of staunch women, and one of the things, I guess, for Yuruk, which means truth in Wemba, is truth-telling. And so the grounds you are on the Wurundjeri grounds, we were, during colonisation, from 3,000 down to 13. We all descend from one woman. And so I will, and my family will not give up the fight to make sure that sovereignty is never ceded and that we honour those that come before us. And when I say those that come before us, not just my ancestors or all Aboriginal people that fight for the justices for our people. And in particular, it's always an honour to be, she's going to kill me too later, even in the same room as Apryl, her strength, her fight, her courage and her wisdom for such a young woman is beyond what, is just beyond what you could expect. And I'm honoured to call her a sister and a friend. We always end up in the same places for some strange reason, but I'm really excited to be hearing from her. So Wurundjeri Bik, so welcome to the lands of the Wurundjeri, and may Bunja watch over us tonight as we speak about Aunty. Thank you.
I just want to welcome everyone here tonight, particularly all the Indigenous people in the room and online, and also all the people of colour and everybody else here. Tonight is a real, topic that Indigenous people have lived with for a long time, since day one, since Captain Cook rocked up and his mates. And it's continuing on, and these White Series events are something that, as an Indigenous person who has done a law degree and a master's and now a PhD, it's been a real battle to be in this space and listen how the discussion and how it's taught, and for someone who's worked at grassroots level, I really want to try and bring to Melbourne Law School some of the black excellence that are continue to fight in our communities, but also to give you some understandings of some of the issues that you don't really read in some of the textbooks that are out there, and also some of you won't actually work in this space, and some of you who won't have the real skills to adapt and work in this space. It has trauma for all those who work in this space, particularly Indigenous people, but also I've worked with a lot of non-Indigenous people who work long hours and really face the trauma and understand after many years of working in these spaces. So I just want to thank Sue-Ann for coming to the rescue and volunteering to do a welcome to country. I really appreciate it. I know you're really busy, so it's really appreciated, and we really thank you for giving us your time tonight. Also, I want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people for allowing us to be on this country. It's a beautiful country, and you can feel the warmth when you're here, even though it's freezing compared to where I'm from. But you can feel the warmth of the people, and even those others who live here as well. There's a lot more warmth here than some other states that I've lived in. So I just also, before we go on, I want to thank the Criminal Hub, who's really supported us in collaborating and bringing this today, as well as the Indigenous Law and Justice Hub. It's a lot of work bringing this events together, particularly with COVID around. So there's a lot of work going on and trying to make sure that we look after our guests and that they're comfortable, and making sure that we get all people like you come in and supporting and have a listen. So we really appreciate it. In saying all of that, I'll just kick on now with reading Apryl's bio. Apryl Day is a proud Yorta Yorta, Wemba and Barapa woman. She's a community organiser and campaigner and a member of both War Victoria and Pay the Rent. She's the daughter of Aunty Tanya, a proud Yorta Yorta woman who died in custody in 2017. Apryl and her family successfully led the campaign to end the criminalisation of public drunkenness in Victoria, and is at the forefront of the fight for police accountability and justice matters. Apryl is Executive Officer and founder of the Dhadjowa Foundation, a national grassroots organisation that provides strategic guidance and support to amplify the campaign of families and to fight for justice for all families of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who died in custody. So welcome, sis, and just want to make sure you are comfortable.
Yeah, no, I am, thank you. And before we get into it, I too just want to acknowledge country and the Wurundjeri people, Suan and all the mob here today. I grew up here, half in Echuca, so it's good to be back home here. And yeah, always love seeing the mob, and Suan always has to shame me up, so I'll yarn her later.
So can you tell us a bit about who you are, your mob, and what the values that drive you?
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking about this question and you'd think that it would be like really easy to answer. But I think for me, because having that public figure and like, you know, we've had to broadcast our grief and trauma and our grief to be able to be on that public platform to receive some accountability for mum, that's usually like when I go to say like who I am, like, oh, the daughter of Tanya Day, or, you know, and proceed to give that little run and talk about Dhadjowa. But, you know, like for me and for other families, like that's not our brand. You know, we're more than the trauma and grief that we experienced. And, you know, like Eddie read up my mobs, but, you know, proud Aboriginal woman, you know, I grew up between here and Echuca on the banks of Murray River. And, you know, I'm a mum. I'm a single mum of 2 daughters. Beautiful little girls. One won a 100-metre race, is the fastest 10-year-old in the district. I'm telling everybody that, and I know she'll hate me for it. I have another daughter. She has a rare neurological disability, Rett syndrome, and I just want to share those personal details because I think it's important that within all the hard stuff and the work and the public speaking, having those vulnerable moments to remind everybody that family members are family members and we're normal people that experience, you know, other hardships, and, you know, just to shine a light at the start of the yarn about what actually it takes and the toll it takes on deaths in custody families. So, yeah, daughter of Tanya Day, mum, love the bush.
Everything,
yeah.
I mean, we brought you here a bit early before we came here, and just to pick your brain around some of the discussions that myself and others who you know, worked in this space and how we can develop better discussions with community, and also how we can possibly develop better standards and you know, for professional who work in this space, like lawyers and that. And you know, some of the things you were telling us, it's things that we don't learn in these institutions, and it's really interesting in that fact that you've got all this experience that we should be respecting, right? And in saying that, then I just want to say, like, one of the things that was central to your campaign is ending the criminalisation of public drunkenness. Can you just tell us a bit about why this is important and where things are with this at the moment?
Yeah, well, you know, like, I'm not too sure who's aware of Mum's story, but she was arrested for public drunkenness. So, you know, public drunkenness is a discriminatory law. It always has been, it always will be. It's used to racially target mob, criminalise mob over something that's actually a health response. And, you know, at the time of Mum's arrest, Aboriginal women were 10 times more likely to be arrested for public drunkenness than a non-Indigenous woman. And it's another reason why back in the Royal Commission in the 90s, it had been recommended to be abolished. And throughout all of the coronials of deaths in custody, it had been recommended to be decriminalised in Victoria over and over again, and the Victorian government had failed to do that. And in the Royal Commission, it was actually Uncle Harrison Day, which is a family member of ours, also died in police custody in Echuca, and he was arrested for a $10 unpaid fine for drinking in a public place. So he was placed in a cell, you know, similar circumstances to a lot of mob, wasn't monitored effectively, and he died from an epileptic fit. So it's a really like horrible example of how the just repeating that colonial violence towards mob and, you know, the failure to actually implement change and how that creates intergenerational trauma. So that was, you know, over 30 years ago with Uncle Harrison, and then Mum has suffered a similar fate. And we did achieve the decriminalisation of public drunkenness. It was announced just before Mum's coronial inquest in 2019. And yeah, it was to decriminalise public drunkenness and replace it with a public health response, so having sobering centres and things like that. And we were successful in it, but obviously we're not there yet. The failure was due to the Victorian government, you know, dragging their feet, and there's a lot of discussions back and forth around police powers and all that sort of stuff. So at the moment, it's delayed until November 2023. Which is really unfortunate for us as a family, but as well as for community, because like we don't want anyone else to die for this law. But it's also really important that it's done appropriately and in the right way, because one of the things is police powers, you know, like we can't have police in a position where they're going to leverage that and still target people, and they should never be first responders when it comes to health. And, you know, there is no circumstance where a police cell is ever safe for someone that's intoxicated.
Yeah, look, we're heading up to Darwin tonight. We got some research to do on our way through to Gama. And look, I used to be the discrimination commissioner there, and there's a 2K law where you can't drink within 2Ks of a liquor outlet. And we have all these tourists lined up on the foreshore watching the sunset go down and drinking, and then you have mob on the left there having their little drink, and they're getting moved on or locked up. And I used to get a lot of complaints from tourists about that sort of behaviour by police in regards to our mob, you know, doing exactly the same what they were doing, and like you said, it's a vehicle to basically target our people, and not only our people but people of low socioeconomic background who are living in you know, living rough and don't have an ability to drink at home, and so these are continuous issues that are, as you pointed out, from the Royal Commission.
Yeah, and just like another example about like that racial injustice, like when they actually arrested Mum, she went to the cell, and immediately after, they actually went and picked up a white woman from a hotel who was like heavily intoxicated and harassing people there, and they drove her home safely. They didn't actually issue her a fine. But, you know, in that parallel universe of a black woman, here's Mum literally put in a cell, and they didn't even go in and check her once, and then she's died. So that's like exactly the same moment, 10 minutes difference, to be able to show how the police treat black women versus a white woman.
Thank you for that, sis. So you went through a coronial inquest in 2019, 19?
19? Was it 19?
2019. So from that experience, can you sort of tell us what you see that needs to be changed about the whole process? I mean,
Yeah.
I know there's...
People are laughing because like I've worked with a lot of people in this room, and we all know, but there's a lot, you know. I've said this plenty of times, but like, you know, the coroner's court is like one of the very systems that does need to be critiqued. It's not a culturally safe place for mob, for families, you know. It doesn't make sense me saying this, but to me, because I know the other circumstances of families, but we were fortunate enough of what we were able to get in the coroner's court. But yeah, it's not a safe place for mob, you know, like that's not our law. That's, you know, white man's law that we need to go through to be able to understand what happened to our loved ones. And, you know, the coroner's court as a whole doesn't centre families and their needs, doesn't centre the person of the, you know, loved one that died. And it's very cold in there. It's just like stock standard, like, you know, this is someone's loved one that died, this is a person, but it's, you know, that is removed from the coroner's court, and it's why families advocate so hard just to be able to humanise our loved ones. And even things like, you know, a family grieving and there's police at the coroner's court in uniforms with guns surveying the families, you know, because of a Facebook post or something. You know, there's too many black people in one room, so all of a sudden now there's Victoria Police at the doors, you know. Things like, you know, police investigating police, like that's a huge issue. It is like a very issue of why a lot of our loved ones aren't getting the justice and the truth and accountability that we deserve, because you've got police investigating police and the police is under the supervision of the coroner, and then, you know, if you have a completely flawed and inadequate investigation, you would think that the coroner would then highlight that and bring that to light, but the coroner is supervising this. So it's sort of like, how are they then going to critique the very system that they're a part of? And it just is that ongoing cycle of that violence towards mob and the silencing of mob.
So I went to the inquest for a couple of days, and one of the things that sort of upset me was, could you tell me how many lawyers that the government had representing their various departments that they had there?
It took up the majority of the table, and the police investigator had his own lawyer. Like, you know, like, make it make sense. Like, that's just how corrupt it is.
I think I counted one day 50 on their side, and there were QCs, and you just wonder how much we're spending on a process every time we have a coronial. And as we spoke earlier about the number of recommendations that have come on top of the deaths in custody, the 339 there.
Yeah.
All this money being utilised to, you know, pay for legal representation possibly could be.
Yeah. It's like all that money just to protect the people that are actually responsible for black people dying in custody. When if you were to put that back into community organisations, back into the families, back into the things that actually, you know, help our community, you'd think that it would be a lot more powerful. But, you know, it's not obviously something that they want to do.
But is that something you see regularly in your new role when you go to these coronials, about the numbers of?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, like things that we yarned about, like it's different going to a coronial that's in the city versus going to a coronial that's in the rural areas. Because it's just, they are hoping that the family don't have support. They're hoping that family don't turn up. And you'll see that the bigger of a profile that that person has or the family has, the more lawyers that there are. You know, and it's just, it's a lot, and it can really make that experience of while you're sitting in the coroner's court a lot more intimidating.
Can you give some perspective to some of the young lawyers to be here, and what possible that they should be across and have an understanding of?
Yeah, just like what we yeah. Look. For me, like if you are an ally, like first thing, like if you've got a white saviour complex, like dead it, like go on, work on it, you know. White fragility, same thing, because that can really get in the way of how you work with Aboriginal families. You know, like there's layers to working with mob, and you need to really approach it with like a holistic mindset. You can like be your worst enemy if you don't work with families in that mindset. I very big advocate for lawyers having a campaigning background. And even if you don't have a campaigning background, try and get one in the legal context, because I know when it comes to media and stuff, it can get a bit tricky, but it's literally your responsibility as the lawyer to make sure that the families are involved understand what's happening during that, but also linking them into other community organisations, other collectives, campaigners, to be able to build on that. Because from what I know from my experience with mum and working with other families, it's like being able to, build a movement and build a campaign doesn't just happen in your legal meetings, it happens in community, it happens on the street, and with absolutely everything that you do, centre the family's voices, centre what they want to do. It's their loved one. Give them the power to be able to make those informed decisions for themselves. And, when we were with Vals, like one of the things that we did first up was we did like a cultural media protocol thing, those little things, which, may not seem like they'll have a huge impact, make a huge difference. So really simple thing, like don't speak for families without their permission, don't release images, stories, names, anything without them being across it. And you make sure that they're the ones that get to have their quotes. If they do want to do media, they're the ones in the front, that they're the ones speaking. Because it does make a difference between, like, if you're trying to achieve that systemic change and a certain reform, that can be the difference between if you actually achieve it and if you don't. And you can, have a look at our campaign, for example, and what we achieved with systemic racism. That was family-led, with our lawyers, with our community. It was because our family voice was centred. Systemic racism, things like that. You see the family of Wayne Fuller Morrison and what they did, that's a family-led campaign. Miss Drew's family with the fines in WA. Like, there is a long list that can show how effective it is. And it's actually, besides all of what you can achieve, it's the right thing to do. Like, culturally, professionally, but just on a personal level, you should be centering the family and how they want to tell their story and their loved one first and foremost.
And there's also community politics that also has to play out, right? And our legal people don't know or understand that, right? And
that's exactly why you need to get the community members involved. With ours, we had like a heap of mob around us and allies, people that had experience in law, people that had experience in campaigning, and to help build that. But just like, especially like if you're an ally, you don't understand any of that. You're not in the community. Like, how are you meant to know? So it's like your responsibility to bring people in so they're aware of that. But it also offers the family more support. And when the family have more support, you're harder to quiet down. They're going to be more concerned when the family have larger crowds at court, and that's going to bring more media attention. Like, everything that you do is actually only going to aid and better the family's fight for justice if you do it in the right, respectful way, and it's like done with integrity and not ego and things like that.
In the submission, it says, written from the perspective of your mother. It's not enough to change the law on public drunkenness. I need you to tell the truth about why the law was applied to me differently from the way it would have been applied to a white Australian grandmother, drunk and asleep on a train on her way to Melbourne to visit her daughter, about why the police took me into a cell rather than to hospital or home, about why the police treated me like a criminal and completely failed to care for me, even though they said they were imprisoning me for my own safety. Can you tell us about the refusal by the legal institution to talk about systemic racism?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot, hey. It's like, for me, it's a bit like, and for mob, it's a bit mind-blowing, isn't it? Like, this colony is literally founded, like, they invaded, it's theft, it's murder, it's genocide. And the fact that we won't even address that systemic racism is a thing is beyond me, not within the education system, not within the police force. And for me, it's like, why would the people in power want to address systemic racism when they're benefiting from it? it's aiding them in their agenda and what they want to do. It feeds back into, you know, what the colony wants and what it's been designed to do. If they do, they're going to have to do things like truth-telling, land back, sovereignty. You know, they're going to have to actually defund and abolish the very systems that they've built to then, you know, defund them and dismantle those that are killing First Nations people. I mentioned how we had systemic racism included within the scope of Mum's inquest. We had to fight really hard for that, and it was the first inquest that they actually included systemic racism within a scope of a death in custody, which is like, we have a royal commission with 339 recommendations and 99 black deaths that talks about that, and yet within those 30 years up until we had Mum's coronial inquest, that's not something that they're addressing. And that is not for anyone's benefit but the colony and the people that are in power. And I think that once that's actually acknowledged is when we're able to put systems in place to be able to keep our mob safe.
So, like I said before, we had a chat just before, and since the tabling of the deaths in custody, they're saying that there's been 500 and they're reporting 504 deaths since. You were saying that you...
I don't believe that.
Yeah.
Like, at all. Like, I don't know what the number is, but I know it's higher than that. And, like, it's still good to know that it's... Like, that's why I always say over 500, you know, but... Like, for example, when we talk about last year, and you know how, like, there was a lot of deaths in custody, we kept being like, oh, it's like, it's 11 now, it's this, and everyone was like thinking this is crazy, like there are so many deaths in custody. And like, I didn't know this until I obviously started to link in with the coroner's court and the workers that are at the coroner's court. And yeah, I linked in with New South Wales at Lidcombe Coroner's Court there, and I said, can you send me a list of the death in custody matters so I can link in and support the families? The list was so long, there was like 20 names on it. And I thought, nah, because that is not what everyone was saying. If we're talking about the numbers last year, this is just one state. That's just one coroner's court that I've linked in. What about all of the other states that haven't given their number, or, you know, the family haven't spoken about that death in custody because we know that they don't report it in the news. We know that they don't want to talk about it. This is mainstream media and that now. Police are never going to be like, oh yeah, you know, someone died in our cells last week. That's never going to happen. But for me, it was just like, it was a real shock to see the list of names and thinking, we must have no clue about how many have actually been dying recently.
So just coming out of your experience with the coronial process, you founded the Dhadjowa Foundation. Is a national grassroots organisation that's been established to provide strategic, coordinated and culturally appropriate support for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families whose families have died in custody. Your work on supporting families through peer support, financial assistance and campaign capacity building. Can you tell us a bit about the works that the Foundation does, and how would you like to see the Foundation move forward?
Yeah, so like with all the stuff that you mentioned, really, we do that holistic wraparound support to link in with families, you know, at whatever period of the process that they're in, but, you know, especially if it's like a loved one and they've just lost someone, and, you know, it's in sorry business, helping them organise the funeral. And it's a lot of talking them through the process and what it's looking like for them for the next couple of years. I don't think a lot of families realise how long the journey is and what it's going to take. Supporting the families, you know, with their campaign strategies, media training, you know, getting them ready if they're wanting to, because not every family wants to, you know, be doing this. But if they do, you know, helping them prepare for that, you know, helping them do media releases, crowdfunding, funding them to be able to bury their loved ones, and to be getting them to and from coronial inquests and things like that. But you know, people are like, oh, how do you, like, what do you want to see for Dhadjowa next? Like, how do you want it to grow? Like, I don't want it to grow because, like, why would I want it to grow? Because if it does grow, that means that there's something wrong and that the government isn't doing what they need to do to address national crisis of deaths in custody. Because, like, we're only here because of that injustice. You know what I mean? So it's just sort of like, no, I don't want it to continue. Is that me? Probably. I don't want it to continue, you know? But because we've seen that there's absolutely no commitment to even addressing the fact that we're dying at these alarming rates, like, you know, want to be able to build Dhadjowa on a high platform so families do have more financial support to be able to do what they want to do. You know, we can only provide a little bit because there are so many families. In terms of, like, positions, like, it's me and we now have another worker, but outside of that there's a lot of volunteer work that goes into it. Like, you know, there's mob here that help be Dhadjowa, and without that, like, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. But you know, focusing on things like research, putting things like, you know, ethics about how to work with mobs during coronial inquests, how to support families, and, you know, even linking in with mob on a global scale to be able to yarn to them about how they campaign over there, like wherever it may be, First Nations mob, and like how they achieve systemic change, to be able to learn off one another. Like, there's a lot of ways that we want to move Dhadjowa to be able to achieve more reform, you know, like, even be deadly to have our own lawyers that actually have that campaigning background. And, you know, focus on things like police accountability and systemic racism, and, you know, even back to the importance of lawyers. Like, there's lawyers that have been able to help families achieve change like what we had, and we're really, really lucky, you know. But there's a lot of lawyers that have done the complete reverse effect, and they've made it worse for the family. You know, they've broken the family. They stopped the family from wanting to campaign and to do those things. They've actually stopped the family from even being able to go and pursue a civil suit because they didn't do the right things that they needed to do. And that's, you know, the reality of how hard it can be for families to actually come across a good lawyer that's doing it with a community mindset, was doing it, you know, doing it with the right values in place and centering the families. And yeah, it's like so imperative that if you are going to be working with families, that you link in community and you do all those steps to make sure that you're given the best to the family and the best chance for them to be able to achieve what they need.
Thanks, sis. So we just, before we go to Q&A, do you just want to tell everyone how they can assist your organisation? And
donate. Yeah, no, please donate. It's actually really important. It can be the difference whether someone's able to bury their loved one or not, you know. So yeah, you can go via our website. There's a donate there. There's a regular donation too, which I think is really important. Even if it's $5 a week, you know, $5 you spend more on coffee. That's what I always say, because it puts things into perspective, eh? But yeah, $5 a week, you know, and that ongoing thing really does make a difference. And yeah, follow our Twitter, because we do a lot of live tweets from the coroner's court, which is not what you're going to get from the journalists, because they pick and choose, which they actually started pulling from our Twitter to write their articles, which is like, you fellas just need to go to the court, you know. But, you know, it is what it is. But yeah, and continue to share the stories of the loved ones, of the families that are advocating, and, you know, show up when they ask you to, if there's a rally, if there's a petition.
So before I let everyone know what to do to put a question up, the Melbourne Law School is a you know, breed of leaders and in this country, right? They have had 4 prime ministers. I think it's 9 premiers. So you got an audience here who will possibly go on to be that, right? Mm. Do you want to just give them a...
What?
Like, tell them what they should do in dealing with Indigenous people?
I don't know, I acknowledge sovereignty, that'll be real deadly, you know, land back. A lot of the conversations with anything, blackfellas are left out of the conversation. And that right there is like the worst possible thing that you can do. Like, we know the solutions of a lot of things, deaths in custody, you know, land, like, have a look at the climate, you know. Centre blackfellas in everything, that's my number one thing.
All right, so if you want to put a question to our guest here, you can. If you're online, you can do it via the Zoom there, and we'll have Janae here to read out the question. Or if you're here, just can you email mls-indigenous@unimel.edu.au.
Alright, thanks so much, Apryl, for your generosity this evening. I have one question here so far, so I'd encourage everyone to start submitting them, whether you're online or in person. Uncomfortable things to talk about, but important to sit in that discomfort and ask these questions. So the one I have so far is, hi Apryl, thanks for speaking tonight. Could you please share what type of campaigning background you want lawyers to have within the legal sphere? What does this look like practically? E.g., making submissions to inquiries, law reform submissions, attending protests. What does this mean working in community legal centres or VALs or anywhere else? Police accountability lawyers and coronial lawyers might be working.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to try and remember all of that question. Oh, look, you know, like all of my I wasn't a campaigner beforehand. Like, I didn't even public speak, you know, that may be a shock, but I hated it. You'd never get me to do it. But all of the campaigning and the things that I've learnt is on the ground in community. You know, like, I embedded myself around the people that were supporting us but taught me along the way, you know, and then I've obviously gone on then and I've participated in things like campaigning workshops and all the rest of it. I think being like, with any of the campaigning that you're going to be doing or trying to do, like, first and foremost, be respectful. And if you're going to be doing campaigning and working with Aboriginal families, like, I wouldn't say like, oh, just like jump in and go and try and like lead it. That's why I mention linking in with community members, because community members know. So actually going to, you know, talk about war, you know, like war is deadly. Oh, that sounds like, okay, I'm not being, no nepotism, you know, but I'm obviously a member of war now because of the support that war gave me during Mum's coronial inquest, and then obviously, like, they're like my family now. We do a lot of work together. But
you're not talking armed conflict. Can you explain for people?
Oh yeah, Warriors of Aboriginal Resistance. You can follow us on Facebook too. So, but that was a perfect example of being able to link into them so they can be able to then show you what is culturally appropriate in community to be able to do. So I hope that explains it, because then obviously that leads into other things like doing your submissions and your petitions and all of that, but it's hard to say if you're not working from the very point of the grassroots first.
Yeah, it's foundational.
Yeah.
Get a list tonight. So this is a good question to ask in front of Sue-Ann, Commissioner. What are your hopes for the Yorta Justice Commission, and what do you think about the truth-telling process that would be different from previous experiences, such as the Royal Commission that you've discussed tonight into deaths in custody as a former Victorian?
Yeah, I'm really laughing because we talked about this earlier, and especially things, look, if I'm not fully across it, I won't go and try and act like I can give an educated guess. But for me, it's like really important for consultation, like consultation needs to be done appropriately for all mobs on all levels. I don't really want to hear anything about treaty if we're not talking about racism and we're not talking about land back and sovereignty and things like that. So I would like to think that with anything that's going to come out of this, it's centering Aboriginal voices and sovereignty and addressing things like deaths in custody and the injustices that our mob are facing.
All right, so the next, there's a few questions about resourcing of Dhadjowa. What should people think about in terms of grassroots organisations and government funding? And does Dhadjowa accept interstate remote volunteers? Questions about how people can support your work.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't judge another grassroots community or collective if they wanted to take government funding. It's their prerogative, but I don't, simply for the fact that I'm fighting with the government every week. You know, I'm trying to hold them accountable. I don't want their money. I don't want to be strong-armed into doing anything that we don't want to do. I like to be really transparent about that. I like to keep our independence. You know, we have had offers from department if they, you know, we want to take money, and to me it's like, why? You know, like I'm literally in meetings every week trying to hold you accountable for the fact that you haven't implemented my mum's recommendations. It's like, for me, it's like blood money, I don't want it. And that's why I just like focus on fundraising, the donations, you know, like the recurring donations, like I mentioned, is really important, and philanthropy, being able to link in with like really rich white people. It's like, sorry, if you have anybody that has a trust and wants to donate to Dhadjowa, please send me an email.
Next big question, would you place importance on defunding the police and abolishing prisons? Probably people can gather from context, but... Yeah,
I would. Look, I always get real like shame answering this too, because I always say to Crystal, I'm like, no, I don't want to talk about abolition. Like, you're the abolitionist, like, you know everything, you know? And she's always like, stop it, like, you do. But yeah, absolutely. Like, how we got to reform something that's, people say it's broken, but is it broken? Because it's like, it's doing exactly what it's meant to do. But yeah, absolutely. How are you meant to reform something that has been structurally built to work the way that it is against us?
So talk to us about some of your recommendations about what can be put in place instead of police in the context of public intoxication, but otherwise.
Money back into community, you know, like resourcing community. They always make it like they can't do that, but they've got no problem like taking money and budget away from schools and healthcare and all the rest of it, but then you want to pump billions into prisons, you know, it's like that doesn't actually make sense. You're pulling money away from community and away from the resources that can help aid and keep community safe. And, you know, the prison industrial complex, like, I have friends and people that are currently in prison and people that have come out, and I haven't seen it work any better for them. You know, people working for like $20 a week to be sitting there making, you know, equipment to go to Aldi and whatever, you know, it is. Like, it's, especially when you're hearing stories from people that you love about how they're in their like straight up slave labour to be able to create things, and then they're using that money to then put back into the prison to be able to buy whatever they need from the prison. So, but like, look, I don't know everything too, so.
I feel like I'm firing questions at you, but we are getting some good ones. So you mentioned that we should always include mob in conversations, but I assume you've been asked to work for free a fair bit. What are some of the ways to do that without demanding free labour and demanding that Black people always have to face or discuss traumatic things?
Oh, don't ask Black people to work for free at all. Like, I don't think that, especially family members, you know, like, everyone deals with things differently, but like, you know, I come here and like I mentioned at the start, like, you have to display your trauma and your grief and all the rest of it and be vulnerable, and after that, families have to then go deal with their day-to-day life. However someone goes home and decompresses from all that, you know, I'm not too sure. Sometimes I just switch off and I just move on to the next thing. But yeah, if you're trying to like, I don't know, have people speak at your thing, or you're trying to learn, or you're trying to get them to participate in your PhD, like, take a think about what emotional toll that's going to take on their mental health. And yeah, don't ask Black people to work for free. It's different when we're doing our work within community. We do a lot of work in our community for free, but that's different. As settlers, I wouldn't be asking people to do that.
We've heard you speak before about the struggle to humanise family members in the media. Can you talk to us a bit about what that work is?
Yeah, I think when we were doing it, we didn't realise what we were doing. Like, because we know who mum is, you know, like she was a grandmother of 8, like favourite colour was pink, like it's the same things that we talk about. That's why I like my niece, she is the one that came up with the idea to do pink for Tanya Day on mum's birthday. So now every year we get people to wear pink and like tag us and we share it, and you know, like the news articles, like they pick it up and they write things and all the rest of it. And yeah, like at that time we were just trying to make sure that mum was painted for who she was and not criminalised like she was on that day, because we know that they do that in the media. We were just more just speaking about who she was because it's important to us. But then we started to realise, like, oh, actually, we need to work really hard to remind people that these are our loved ones and not another statistic. So then we made sure that with absolutely everything that we centred who she was and reminded people of that. And yeah, like my niece was like 8 when she came up with that idea. She's like, did a little movement on her nan's birthday, which is really beautiful. But, you know, the flip side was like, why do we have to work so hard to humanise our loved ones? Like, we actually shouldn't need to. And if you look on, you can look up any news article and how they will like talk about, you know, like a white fella that died, and then if they talked about a black fella, it's like completely different. You even seen in like the Kulin Walker trial, you know, that poor fella was, you know, put on trial for his own murder, the way that they spoke about him, but then failed to mention anything about Rolf and his past history and how violent he was to Aboriginal people, or even, you know, the circumstances of how he approached Kulin before even that first interactions, how obsessed he was, how he watched that footage over and over again, you know. But we're going to focus on the point of Kulin being the dangerous person when he's actually, you know, the 19-year-old that's not here anymore.
The next one I'll go to is around the different purposes that the different actors in coronial inquests come to, and I guess any reflections that you wanted to share as someone who's been through this as a family member and supported families about, I guess, how the different purposes of coronial, or how different actors might see different purposes in coronial inquests and what they're participating in it for.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a hard one because like every coronial is different. Mum's coronial, we were probably more lucky than we are the next family. But can you like elaborate a bit more on it? Because I'm just trying to think of like during Mum's and how.
All right, I'll do a personal elaboration. I guess in terms of how lawyers might come to understand the purpose of coronial inquests as what is aligned to the Coroner's Court Act, how people participating in the court viewing the process, or what I guess can be got out of the coronial inquest process. I
would hope that if a lawyer was in a coronial inquest that they would have a really good understanding of the coronial inquest. You know what I mean? And like also like what we keep talking about, like it's different to just enter a coronial inquest with a white family than when you're entering it with a black family, because you've obviously got all those other layers of colonisation and, you know, deaths in custody and the intergenerational trauma and all those things like that. So I think that if you're going to be working in a coronial setting, like you just need to have that understanding that there are many layers to it, and even have a look at the past coronial that have happened. Have a look at, you know, what happened throughout that proceeding and what the family actually got out of it and where they're at now. Because a lot of the times the families get nothing. You know, like I had a meeting last week to talk about the recommendations and if they've been implemented. You know, like that was 2 years ago. Mum died 5 years ago, and we're still having meetings if the police manual's been updated. Like I want to be like sitting with Vic Pole talking about if they've, you know, implemented them meaningfully. So yeah, I would do your research, because I feel like some lawyers just jump into it and just like read it off face value and then just go in, you know, where it's like there is a lot of history there that you need to actually be across. Like have a look at the Royal Commission, read those recommendations, and don't listen to the report where they said that they've implemented like 70%, because that is not true.
So we've got I guess for the final question, there's quite a lot of questions about resources and what people can do and what people should be watching, listening and getting involved with, including your spot in Incarceration Nation.
Yeah.
What would you recommend people do to change the culture of the profession? What resources could they be looking out for?
I always say, like, the resources are in your community. You know, like, for example, like Melbourne Vals, you know, like being across what your local communities are doing and advocacy groups, like what sort of reforms they're working on, what campaigns they're supporting, what petitions they're pushing out. And if you're, because really, like if you're just living in your little bubble in your day-to-day and you're just like doing whatever, like what are you really across? You know, you need to actively go out to try and know what that is, especially if you're not First Nations, you're not in community, you need to put in that extra work to be across what we're dealing with and what we're working with. But obviously not doing that in a way where, you know, you're, like I mentioned, you know, like with the white saviour complex and stuff, you know, like you want to be there to support mob, but you don't want to be over speaking and stepping in a place that's actually for them. So yeah, just have a look at what your local organisations are doing and just show up to rallies, show up to things that are important. When we had Mum's coronial inquest, before we had it, we had community meetings. That wasn't just for Aboriginal people, it was for allies too. And the purpose of that was like to sit everybody in a room and just be like, okay, this is the coronial process, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is the background of what happened to Mum, this is like what submissions we're trying to do and all the rest of it. So when community asks for your attendance at things like that, you need to show up.
Right, so Apryl flew from Brisbane today, and fortunately for us, Qantas didn't cancel their flight.
I was shocked, yeah.
So can we just give Apryl a bit of a round of applause? A gift.
This one is for you as well.
Thank you.
From the Dean.
That's deadly, thank you.
And this is for you, Commissioner. No worries. So I just want to again thank everyone for coming. You have someone here who's, you know, faced, you know, one of the most worst fears you could ever to face, right? And that's common in most Indigenous families, right? We, unfortunately, like Sis said, we all face it, and we have family members who are either incarcerated or have died in custody. And the reality is that it is ongoing, and we shouldn't be happy with it, and we shouldn't rely on the families to continue the constant battle to make change. And it's just not Indigenous people. Again, if you take colour out of it, it's low socioeconomic, but unfortunately people of colour are profiled, and unfortunately these things do happen, and we do have all these recommendations that constantly are ignored. And you know, we're having a coronial at the moment, and we were just talking previously, it'd be great to see all the recommendations that have been done across the country and similar ones that, you know, are constantly being regurgitated because of, you know, whether it's police powers or, you know, health issues around doctors and the services that were lacking in regards to Indigenous people. So I just want to thank everyone for coming, giving us your time, and having a listen to Black excellence here. And we're just hopefully that we can continue to provide, you know, another side to the issues of justice in this country. So thank you for coming. Appreciate it.